The silence would arrive before the panic. No wings, no buzzing, no movement in the air. Across the planet, insects would simply be gone. The world would not notice immediately. Morning traffic would continue. Coffee machines would hiss. Birds would still sing. But the air would feel strangely empty. Mosquitoes would not circle bedroom lights. Flies would not land on fruit bowls. Ants would not march across kitchen floors. Relief would come first. The disappearance of insects might seem like a gift. No bites, no pests, no buzzing through humid summer nights. For a brief moment, the world might celebrate. But the quiet would continue, and the quiet would begin to feel unnatural. Birds would be the first to notice. Swallows would sweep across fields again and again. They would search lower each hour, but the sky would give nothing back. Sparrows would move frantically through grass. Warblers would dart through tree branches, yet nothing would rise from the leaves. The insects would not return. Frogs would remain still beside ponds. They would wait. Nothing would land on the water. Spiders would sit in perfect webs, but their traps would hold only dust. At first, forests would still look healthy. Leaves would remain green. Flowers would still bloom, but the rhythm beneath the surface would be gone. Insects are not background creatures. They are part of the machinery of life. They pollinate plants. They recycle nutrients. They aerate soil. They feed countless species. Without them, the structure of ecosystems begins weakening. The first visible collapse would appear in the skies. Bird populations would begin falling rapidly. Many species depend almost entirely on insects. Within weeks, nests would fail. Chicks would stretch open mouths. Parents would return with nothing. Entire broods would slowly disappear. Amphibians would follow soon after. Frogs and salamanders rely heavily on insect prey. Their food supply would vanish overnight. Reptiles that hunt amphibians would begin struggling. The damage would ripple upward through food chains. Small losses would trigger larger ones. Predators would begin disappearing. Entire ecosystems would begin losing balance. But the next consequence would arrive somewhere unexpected, in the fields. Roughly 3/4 of global crops depend on insect pollination. Bees once carried pollen between flowers. Butterflies and beetles supported the same process. Without insects, plant reproduction would collapse. Orchards would bloom beautifully. But fruit would never appear. Almond trees would produce flowers, yet the branches would remain empty. Apple blossoms would cover entire hillsides, but the harvest season would bring almost nothing. Tomato plants would grow tall and green, yet their vines would hold no fruit. Pumpkins, melons, berries, and cucumbers would suffer the same fate. Farmers would notice quickly. Agricultural forecasts would begin falling. Crop yields would drop across continents. Food markets would react almost immediately. Prices would begin rising. Export nations would restrict supply. Import-dependent countries would feel pressure first. Supermarkets would remain stocked for now, but projections would grow darker. Fruits would disappear first. Vegetables would follow soon after. Seed production would collapse as pollination failed. Scientists would rush to understand the disappearance. No known biological event explains such precision. No disease removes every insect species simultaneously. No climate shift acts with such speed. No pesticide reaches every forest, desert, wetland, and city. The absence would remain unexplained, and the mystery would offer no solution. Researchers would attempt emergency replacements. Some orchards would begin hand pollination. Workers would move slowly between blossoms. Small brushes would carry pollen manually. The work would be exhausting and painfully slow. Insects once performed this task constantly, across entire landscapes. Technology would attempt another solution. Drones would hover above experimental fields. Machines would try to imitate natural pollination, but insects once numbered in the trillions. Replacing them with machines would be impossible. Food production would continue declining. Governments would begin preparing emergency plans. Some nations would restrict grain exports. Others would build strategic food reserves. International trade would become unstable. Food security would become a political priority. History shows hunger destabilizes societies quickly. Tensions between nations would rise, but agriculture would reveal only part of the crisis. Insects perform many invisible jobs. They break down dead plants and animals. They recycle nutrients into soil. They maintain fertility in forests and grasslands. They help keep waste from accumulating everywhere. Without them, decomposition would slow dramatically. Leaves would begin piling across forest floors. Animal waste would remain longer in fields. Dead wood would break down more slowly. The soil would lose its hidden engineers. Over time, nutrients would stop circulating properly. Even wind-pollinated crops would struggle in degraded soil. Freshwater ecosystems would also change. Many aquatic insects once fed river fish. Their disappearance would disrupt aquatic food chains. Fish populations would begin declining. Wetlands would lose biodiversity. Streams would grow quieter. The transformation would spread slowly across landscapes. Then another consequence would emerge. Disease patterns would change. Some insect-borne illnesses would vanish with mosquitoes and fleas. That would seem like one rare victory. But the larger health system would still weaken. Malnutrition would rise as diets narrowed. Fresh produce would become scarce. Vitamin deficiencies would spread through poorer populations first. Children would suffer earliest. Rural communities would suffer hardest. Livestock systems would also come under pressure. Feed crops would become less reliable. Pastures would degrade with worsening soil quality. Animal prices would rise. Protein would become more expensive. The crisis would spread from ecology into ordinary meals. Schools would begin teaching a different natural world. Textbooks would describe pollination as a lost function. Biology classes would study preserved specimens behind glass. Children would learn about bees the way they learned about dinosaurs. Something once real, something is now gone. Religions would interpret the silence in different ways. Some would call it judgment. Some would call it warning. Some would see it as proof of human arrogance, because humanity spent centuries treating insects as nuisances. Now the world would discover how much depended on them. Years would begin reshaping ecosystems. Bird populations would shrink across continents. Flowering plants would reproduce less successfully. Entire habitats would simplify. Movement would disappear from places once full of life. Human civilization would attempt adaptation. Indoor agriculture would expand rapidly. Greenhouses would multiply in wealthy nations. Scientists would develop new crop varieties. Some plants would be redesigned for wind pollination. Robotic pollination would improve in limited regions, but these solutions require energy and infrastructure. Many regions could not afford such systems. Food inequality would deepen. Wealthy nations would maintain controlled food production. Poorer regions would struggle with shortages. Migration pressures would increase. Trade tensions would rise. Some conflicts would quietly begin over farmland and water. But the greatest change would remain subtle. The atmosphere of the planet would feel different. Summer nights would grow silent. No moths would circle streetlights. No beetles would crawl across sidewalks. Car windshields would remain clean during long drives. Gardens would feel decorative rather than alive. Children would grow up never seeing fireflies. Museums would preserve insect collections. Glass cases would hold butterflies and beetles, tiny bodies from a vanished world. Scientists would study them carefully. Students would learn about insects like lost civilizations. Researchers would search remote forests for survivors. Every expedition would return with the same answer. Nothing remained. The disappearance would prove permanent. Nature would continue, but it would continue differently. Civilization would adapt where it could, yet the stability of ecosystems would weaken each year because insects were never insignificant. They were structural, they were foundational, they were the quiet labor holding the natural world together. And once that labor disappeared, the silence would remain not peaceful, but permanent.
I'll be back.